All right, we're almost done. Last couple of videos, we went over listing agent and buyer's agent. Now let's look at this when these two parties come together. So we have our parties here. On the left, we have our selling side. On the right, we have our buying side. This is called an A to B transaction. Okay, so seller is always A, and the first buyer is always B. Listing agent Jen put seller Sally's house on the MLS. That allowed buyer's agent Debbie to find that house and put in a search criteria for buyer Bob's buying criteria. And all of a sudden they found seller Sally's house. Well, now buyer agent Debbie is going to call listing agent Jen, and she's going to start negotiating on the behalf of buyer Bob. Listing agent Jen is going to make sure that she does not let any privileged information slip out of her mouth to buyer agent Debbie's benefit or buyer Bob's benefit, because listing agent Jen represents seller Sally. Okay. Now, as these two negotiate back and forth, they're going to come to an agreement, and ultimately listing agent Jen is going to tell buyer's agent Debbie that, this is a great house. There's no issues. She just remodeled the kitchen, and she's going to disclose anything she's required to disclose, and she's going to not disclose everything that she's not required to disclose because it benefits seller Sally. Now, hopefully buyer's agent Debbie understands how to underwrite and comp properties. That way she can get a better deal for buyer Bob. Now, if you remember, buyer Bob went to Mr. Banker and he only has $150,000 that the bank will lend him. Okay? So if the bank will only lend him $150,000, then that's their range, their buying range. All right. So now buyer's agent Debbie is going to go back to buyer Bob, and she's going to say, hey, listen, if you want this house, I went ahead and ran a CMA again, right? So listing agent Jen ran a CMA for seller Sally to get the 165. Buyer's agent Debbie is going to run the exact same CMA for buyer's Bob. And that CMA is going to come back, and it's going to have buyer's agent Debbie's opinion attached all over it. Now, buyer's agent Debbie is on buyer Bob's side, and it's her job to get buyer Bob the best price possible. Now, keep in mind though, buyer's agent Debbie is actually to her benefit to work with buyer who can buy a more expensive property, because when we talk about agent commissions, there's only a 6% commission on this entire transaction. Right now, listing agent Jen has all the rights to the 6% commission, and typically in most transactions it is split 3% to the listing agent and 3% to the buyer's agent. Now, if buyer's agent Debbie is able to negotiate this seller Sally's house down to $100,000, she actually loses money. On the opposite side, if she's able to talk buyer Bob into paying $165,000 for the house, or even $170,000 in the house, she makes more money. Okay. Now, it's bad practice, and I'm not saying that happens, but I just want to lay that out there because it's human nature to always think of ourselves. Now, Debbie and Bob, they're going to get together and they're going to write an offer. Now, they're going to write an offer, and they're going to put their price on it. And let's say they put the price at $155. Actually, we're going to start this off. I'm going to make this interesting. We're going to start this off at $145,000. Now, they send it over to listing agent Jen. Now, buyer's agent Debbie, you know, she probably mentioned, hey, you should probably offer at least 150 if that's what you was approved for, because she's saying that it's a nice house and they got interest in it. Now, buyer Bob, he's like, no, I want to save some money. So he offered 145. Listing agent Jen sees it. She is required to take it to seller Sally. Seller Sally looks at it and she's like, oh my gosh, that is only $15,000 more than I owe on it. I need to make more money. So listing agent Jen is going to counter offer to Debbie. And she's going to say, well, how much do you want to counter, Sally? And Sally's going to be like, I still want full price. So they're going to counter at 165. Going to go back on the buyer side. And this can go back and forth forever. But eventually they're going to come on an agreement. So let's just say that it all works out. Both parties. And they meet in the middle. And they come to $155,000. Okay, so now that's more than Bob was approved for. So immediately Bob has to come $5,000 out of pocket. Now let's talk about this. We're going to talk about the math on both sides. So on buyer Bob's side, he's only responsible for the purchase price, right? That's what he's responsible for. But his bank said that he's allowed to purchase up to $150,000. Now, the bank will lend $150,000 only if that is 70% of the total appraised value or purchase price, whichever one is less. Did you hear that? Or appraisal price, sorry, whichever one's less. So let me think about the order of operation to explain this. All right. We're going to talk about an appraisal. Now, let's just say that Jen and Debbie, they like this contract. They agree. They both represent their parties to the best of their abilities. Sally agrees. Bob agrees. Now, because they both agree and they sign it, now they're in contract. Okay? So now they're in contract, and they take this contract and they go to my friend Harry, the attorney. And that's attorney Harry or title company. And this is a lawyer or title professional who is going to take this contract and they're going to request earnest money. Now, in this contract, it's going to say a couple of things. It's going to say purchase price, PP for short, $155,000, and then it's going to say EMD $1,000, and EMD is earnest money deposit, and this is money locking in the contract or like a security. So if buyer Bob violates this contract, $1,000 has already been given to attorney Harry, and this is called open escrow. Now, because escrow is open with $1,000, if Bob violates or breaks or does not go along with any clauses in that agreement, then, and he pulls out and he no longer like moves forward with the agreement, then Sally, she's going to accept the $1,000 as her sole benefit, right? So she's going to accept that as her coverage to cover her losses, right? Because they're taking it off the market right now, which means it's no longer on the MLS, it's no longer for sale. they're no longer shopping for buyers because Bob has committed to buying it. Because Bob has committed to buying it, that $1,000 protects Sally in case Bob doesn't hold up his end of the deal. Also, there's always an inspection period in most cases. Sometimes you can waive your rights for an inspection period, but normally there's always a typical inspection period. In North Carolina, there's actually a DD, due diligence period, and they like to charge for this. Maybe this is $100, maybe this is $500, but this is non-refundable. So Bob is going to give $1,000 EMD, $100 due diligence, and this $100 is going to buy him 2 weeks. Okay, so no matter what, this DD goes straight to Sally. Okay, so Sally now is $100 richer. Okay, no matter what. Now, there's 2 weeks of an inspection period for Bob to go and inspect this property and find any flaws or anything that violates his inspection, his purpose for this property. Now, Bob can cancel for any reason during those 2 weeks. Now, if he cancels during those 2 weeks, he gets back his $1,000. Now, during those 2 weeks, Bob is going to get an appraisal. So, hopefully Debbie has a really good contact, but she's going to call my friend, Appraisal Billy. Okay. Now, Appraiser Billy, he's awesome. Okay. He's going to look at Sally's house. And he's going to do an appraisal. And actually, I'm sorry, I misspoke earlier. So Debbie actually will not ever get the appraiser because Bob is not a cash buyer. That was my mistake. So Bob is not a cash buyer. Bob is borrowing the bank money from the bank. So actually what would happen is Bob is going to call Mr. Banker, and Mr. Banker is going to contact an appraiser that they utilize. Well, that appraiser just so happens to be the same guy, Appraiser Billy. Now, Appraiser Billy works for the bank, not Bob, not Debbie, not Sally, not Jen. Appraiser Billy is hired by the bank because the bank is lending money on this asset, right? This house, and the bank wants to secure their investment. Okay. Now, what that means is Appraiser Billy is going to look in the area and he's going to do a comp or an appraisal on Sally's house, and he's going to go back to Mr. Banker and he's going to say, Mr. Banker, I'm good at my job, and Sally's house is worth $170,000. Okay, this is appraised value. All right, so Mr. Banker receives back the appraisal report. Now, this appraisal report is $170,000. Now, Mr. Banker approved Buyer Bob, for $150,000. Now, this is a good situation for Buyer Bob because Mr. Banker is going to loan him the $150,000 on the LTV of the home, or the loan to value, which is based off of the appraised value, $170,000. Now, typically, what happens is we're going to go ahead and bring Buyer Bob in here. Now, typically, what happens is Mr. Banker will lend Bob 70% of the LTV, and buyer Bob is responsible for the remaining 30. Now, if we take 170,000 multiplied by 0.07, or sorry, 170,000 multiplied by 0.7, it's $119,000. And that is 70%. Okay. Now, if they agree to 155,000 minus 119,000, that's 36,000 cash that will need to come to the table. Okay, let's make that 7 look right. All right, so 70. %. Okay. All right, so now Bob has to make a decision. The bank said they would lend him up to $150,000. Now, this particular home appraised at $170,000. That does not mean the bank will give him the whole $150,000, because they have to secure their investment, right? Secure their investment, and they're going to make sure that they have a good profit margin in case Bob sucks. And if Bob sucks and he stops paying Mr. Banker is going to foreclose on Bob's new house. And he's also going to have 30% equity already in the property. Okay. So the bank will lend $119,000. Bob needs to go find $36,000. Now, the inspections came back great. Right? Bob's happy with the results. But now Bob has to make a decision if he's going to move forward with this, because he needs to come up with $36,000. Now, Bob should have already been expecting this, and buyer's agent Debbie should explain this to him as well. Now, he has the money in savings. He's going to go ahead and move forward. So now the inspection period is over. So now, not only does Sally have $100,000. Now Sally also gets to keep the EMD. So now she has the $1,000. Okay, because the inspection period, the 2-week inspection period, which was in the agreement here, is over. All right, so now what's next? Well, now they're waiting for title to come back. So this whole time, Mr. Banker and buyer Bob was getting an appraisal, and they were doing inspections. Well, attorney Harry was actually working on the title. And it's the title search. Now, what they do is they go back 30 years. In most cases, they go back 30 years, and they make sure that the title, your deed, they're actually separate things, but they're used interchangeably. So a title and a deed. So a deed is the actual legal paperwork that transfers title from one party to another. Whereas the title is a legal concept, the enforceable and recognized right of ownership. A property deed is a physical document that clearly transfers ownership in a transaction, either a sale or a gift. Now, I'm going to explain this in easier terms to understand. Okay. Now, Debbie, in the middle of all this process, she's thirsty. So she goes to the gas station, and the gas station has a bottle of water on the shelf. She looks at the bottle of water and it says $2. So she goes up to the cashier and she says, I want to buy this bottle of water for full price. I'm going to pay you $2 in exchange for this bottle of water. Now, what Debbie is actually asking for is the title of that bottle of water. Okay. So she goes up to Mr. Cashier and she says, may I please have the title or legal ownership of this bottle of water, and I'm going to give you out of my pocket these $2. The cashier obviously agrees. She accepts Debbie's $2 and she gives title and ownership of that bottle of water to Debbie. Well, then she opens up the cashier, she puts the $2, or the cash register puts the $2 in there, and then out pops the receipt. And then she goes, here, Miss Debbie, thank you for your purchase. Here's your receipt showing proof of ownership. And that's the deed. All right. Now, let's continue. And Attorney Harry pulled the title search, right? Looks back and he's looking 30 years of ownership, and he's looking for any liens, encumbrances, any reason why there's not a clear ownership transfer available. And what that means is you can buy a bottle of water and there's something wrong with it. It's damaged. Instead of it being able to be sold again, you can't reuse that bottle of water because the water inside of it is from a pond and it has dirt in it, right? This is a bad example, actually. Let's just say the bottle of water label is torn. Well, you gave full price for the bottle of water, but you want to actually turn around and sell that bottle of water to somebody else in the desert who needs it more than you, but they don't want that bottle of water because the wrapper is torn, right? And because the wrapper is torn, they don't want to transfer that ownership of it. Now, let's go with a better example. Let's say that you go in and you buy a dozen muffins. Okay. And I go to the baker and I say, Mr. Baker, I would like to order 1 dozen of your finest muffins. And the baker goes, okay, give me $20. You get out $20 and you're asking for title, ownership of those dozen of muffins. And he's like, actually, sorry, the price went up and we only have a dozen now for $30. And you're like, oh, Mr. Baker, I am so sorry, I only have $20. Well, Mr. Baker can say, I'll tell you what, since it was my fault, I will accept you to pay me back. I'm going to place a lien and I'm going to hold the receipt of these muffins until you pay me in full. And you say, okay, that's fine, because I was actually planning to go to the school and sell these muffins. So now when you go and sell those muffins, you're coming back and you're paying him off, but you never had ownership of those muffins. And when you pay him off, now he gives you the receipt and your debt is cleared. And now you had full ownership and rights to actually sell those muffins. But before you had that receipt, you actually did not have rights. In real estate, it doesn't work that way. You can't sell something that you do not have ownership of or rights to in some form, right? And the process of what I just described is a partnership. The part that I want you to understand is the ownership needs to be transferred in a real estate transaction in full. And there needs to be nobody else involved. It needs to be clear. No liens, nothing like that owed on it. So if there's a renovated kitchen, and we want to make sure that the contractor is paid all of his money. Okay? All right, so that's the title search. Now, the title search comes back as well, and it's free and clear. Now, the attorney contacts buyer Bob and says, hey, I've been also in touch with Mr. Banker down here, right? So these two have been in touch, Mr. Banker and attorney Harry, and he's getting Mr. Banker to let him know whenever his work is done. That way he can schedule a closing date. Now, most of the time that doesn't even work. Instead, buyer Bob contacts Mr. Banker, and then buyer Bob has to tell the attorney as well, saying, hey, like, this is what we're waiting on. Now we're ready to go. Now, Mr. Banker tells Bob that he's good to go. He's fully approved for the $119,000. They're ready to transfer the money to the attorney when they're ready. So now the attorney Harry, he's going to do his work, and then he's going to contact Bob and say, hey, closing, right? So let me clean this up a little bit. I'm going to get rid of deed and escrow and title search, but you know all that's already happened, okay? Now, Harry is going to schedule closing. And closing is the day that the ownership is transferred in full. That means that's the day that Sally gets her payment for her goods, and that's also the day that Bob receives title and the physical deed of the purchase of real estate. Now, there's closing on Thursday. Buyer Bob, seller Sally, both shows up. They sit down with attorney Harry, and they sign the closing documents. Now, once they assign the closing documents, this deed, this deed is now in buyer Bob's name, and it no longer has Sally's name in it. And then attorney Harry, he has the $155,000 in his escrow account. Actually, I'm going to need to move this real quick. Let's clean this up just a little bit. All right, so there's attorney Harry. Okay. Now, he has his escrow account, right? And Mr. Banker has already transferred the $119,000 in it. Okay. Bob has already transferred his $36,000 in it, making a total of $155,000 cash. Nobody's gotten paid yet. And sorry, actually, I'm wrong. So I actually forgot something here. Yeah, I made a mistake. So that $36,000, he's already gave $1,100 to Sally. So actually, that is deducted out of the money that he needs to bring to closing. And attorney Harry will tell Bob that, and they'll send them the closing statement, and he's going to say, you only need to bring me $35,900. Okay, because we already have $100 of DD, due diligence money, and we already have $1,000 of EMD. And that's our $155,000 purchase price. Okay. Now, the deed gets put in Bob's name. Bob receives ownership. Now, payment has to happen. So, what's going to happen is $155,000 times 0.06. Okay, so that's $9,300 in agent fees divided by 2. It's $4,650. Now, Debbie gets $4,000. Debbie gets $4,650. Jen gets $4,650, making the total $9,300. Okay. So 155,000 minus 9,300 is $145,700. Now, on top of that, we had transfer tax. So 155,000. Typically, this is about 1% to 2%. Right? We had transfer tax, and that's $3,100. And that's what the government charges Sally for selling her property. And then, on top of that, attorney Harry has to get paid. Typically, this is about $1,000. It varies, but typically it's about $1,000, $1,200. We're just going to do $1,000. So now that 145,000 minus 3,100 minus the 1,000 is now $140,900. Now, also, attorney Harry, during his title search, he found out that Sally owed $130,000 on her mortgage from Wells Fargo. Okay. So, attorney Harry has all the money. He's going to actually pay Wells Fargo all of that. So now what's left over is $10,900. Now, he also paid taxes, right? Because taxes are due, and Sally has not paid them yet. Now, taxes were $1,000. So now we're at $9,900. Okay. And there's more fees. Like, I could continue breaking this down, but that was the main ones. In addition to that, if anything came back in the inspection report with appraisal that Bob wasn't satisfied with, he could renegotiate and ask Sally to fix and repair those. So, for instance, maybe there is a door that's messed up. Bob could say, hey, that's going to be $500. I would like a $500 concession. and now $500 will start coming out of Sally's money. So right now, Sally is going to walk away with $9,900. Now she already has $1,100 that comes out of this, right? So her EMD, she doesn't get more money, right? So it was the same price. So that's $8,800. So now she's getting her payment in full, $9,900. So that's how much Sally profited. And that is the whole process of working with a real estate agent or realtor on the MLS, using an attorney, using title, using appraisal. You've seen all the things that happens during a real estate transaction. You should have a really good understanding, overall 30,000 foot view, and you should almost have like upfront and personal view of how this actually works in real life. This is a really good explanation, and if you have any questions or something that you feel like I should have covered more, please let me know.